What's up, everybody? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel, and then follow me on social media on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter so you guys don't miss any of our content over the course of this season. All right, let's talk some basketball. All right, let's move on to our mailbag. We have 4 questions today. I have them on my phone today. First one. Offensively, what does Jonathan Kuminga need to work on in the offseason besides ball handling and three-point shooting to become a legit number 2 option? So again, to become a legit number 2 option offensively, it's a lot more complicated than just one specific skill, right? Like ball handling and shooting are vague concepts too. Like shooting could mean just catch and shoot shooting. Shooting could mean movement shooting. Shooting could mean off the dribble shooting, right? Ball handling, that could mean attacking closeouts. That could mean working in ISO and post-up situations. That could also mean running ball screens, right? A big one, too, for Golden State, which is an important part of this discussion. We got into this in the mailbag yesterday, but just the difference in the different kinds of offenses, right? So like the kinds of skills you need in a 4-out, 1-in offense versus from a role player versus the kinds of skills you need in a 5-out offense, right? And just all the players on the perimeter. So in a 5-out offense, specifically the way Golden State plays, read and react is a huge part of the skill development. What that means is like the ability to quickly interpret what's happening in front of you and make these decisions. So it's kind of like option routes in the NFL. So like if you remember in the NFL, like you might have a guy that like reads the linebacker out of the tight end spot. And if the linebacker's here, he quick turns for a hitch. If the linebacker's there, he might run a 5-yard out instead, right? Like these are read and react plays for the tight end where he's coming off the line, reading what the linebacker's doing, and then making a decision. It's the same kind of thing in 5-out basketball. Like you're setting up for this screening action, but it's very read and react in the sense that like if your guy's top blocking you backdoor. If your guy's trailing, you want to curl, right? Like if your guy's ducking under the pick, you want to flare. Like there's all these different things that you're reading, and especially in 3-man actions, you might change your mind on who's coming out of the screen, right? Or you might slip out of it entirely. There's so many different things that you do read and react basketball in 5-out basketball. And so some of that is not even skill development. It's just reps. And like Jonathan Kuminga just needs lots and lots of reps playing alongside Steph in this 5-out system to just kind of learn how to be better at reading and reacting. But like, if I had to put it simply, to be a legitimate second side creator, or I should say a second option on a championship team, you have to be truly transcendently great at something. Now, to me, for Jonathan Kuminga, that's going to be an ISO post thing. His best skill right now is he is so freaky athletic at his size that most of the players that are big enough to handle him are too slow, and that are fast enough to handle him are too small, right? And so he can get defenders out of position. He can draw fouls. He can get baskets. He's a good on an island scorer. There's real value there. Now, to push it to the elite level where he needs to get, he needs to be a great playmaker in those situations. So again, the ability to read the floor, identify where the help is coming from. A lot of teams bring late help on Kuminga after he puts the ball on the floor. But once he can read those things, he can be a truly elite isolation and post-up player, because you can run that action 10, 15, or 5, 10 times a game. And in those 5, 10 possessions, you're going to get consistent great production regardless of the coverage that he faces, right? But in addition to that, he also has to be able to play in the flow of the offense. That's one of the big things for Kuminga right now is he's good on an island, not so great in the flow. And so that's going to be where his areas of improvement are. From there, it's going to be about like ball handling, specifically ball handling in traffic, ball handling in ball screens. So being able to, what that means is like, let's say he brings his man up the floor, but he's got a good perimeter defender on it. Before he comes off a ball screen, he needs to set him up, meaning like he needs to make a move to one side of the screen and then do a retreat dribble to get the defender into a trailing position on that side before he goes and uses the ball screen. That's a intricate part of ball handling that I'll have to figure out, right? Then once he's coming off the screen, making those reads. Okay, the defender's in a deep drop. I want to get a head of steam going to the basket. Okay. Oh, the defender's a little bit higher and the on-ball guy is trailing behind me. I need to use my size to put the defender in jail. Keep him trapped behind me, start working slowly down the floor until something develops in front of me. And the developing part, that's making the reads. Reading the low man. Okay, I brought the screen defender up, which means the guy in the dunker spot's open. Hit him. Or I brought the screen defender up and they rotated out of the corner. I got to make this skip pass, right? All these reads that he has to get used to making, those are reads that if he wants to be in the 5-out, coming off of those DHOs and coming off of those impromptu ball screens, that he's going to have to get better at, right? But again, to me, to be the legit number 2, he needs to be the best possible version of the ISO post-up player that he is, which primarily is a playmaking thing at this point. And then to be able to function normally in their 5-out offense so that he can maintain his impact when he's not being super aggressive on the ball. And then from there, just, making the defensive improvements that we know he needs to, right? Like, he's a good on ball guy right now, but he can be a little unfocused off ball. So like there's lots of areas of improvement for a player this young, but to become a legit number 2, that's just kind of a little breakdown of what he needs to do offensively. All right, next question. Cavs fan here. I obviously know there's a defined second round ceiling with them. Assuming this happens, what do you think they should do this offseason? Personally, I think making Mobley bulk up and move to the 5 and replacing Allen with a wing who can shoot and move his feet is a good start. So one of the things I really find this interesting because it actually falls very similarly to some of the issues that I've been dealing with as a Lakers fan, right? So Evan Mobley is in this awkward position right now where, like, to play the 4, he needs to make a significant improvement offensively, right? Just in terms of his skill, ball handling, shooting, all that stuff. But to play the 5, he might have some issues in terms of his overall physical bulk, right? Even if he puts on muscle, he might run into similar issues to Anthony Davis. Now, Anthony Davis, when he was at the 4 and had some success with the Lakers in the 2020 and 2021 seasons, he was a much better offensive skill player, right? A guy you could throw the ball to on the block and he was going to ISO score and hit a bunch of jump shots and all this kind of stuff, right? Then what happened is he had an offensive decline. And as that offensive decline happened in 2021, 2022, all of a sudden it became untenable to run Anthony Davis next to a 5. Because if you ran him next to a 5, you were physically imposing, but you didn't have the skill you needed at the 4 spot to make it work, right? That was the issue they'd have, because you'd have like AD who can't shoot next to some other center who couldn't shoot. Right. And like, even when they did have a center who could shoot, a guy like guys like Thomas Bryant briefly there with the Russell Westbrook team, or like a Marc Gasol, they weren't teams that there weren't guys that teams were like really guarding out there. Right. And so the issue is, if you're going to play Evan Mobley at the 4, you're going to deal much better physically with teams, because Mobley at the 4 next to a legitimate center like Jared Allen, you're going to be really physically imposing at times, although they did get a little bit overwhelmed by the Knicks last year. But that only works if Evan Mobley makes the strides offensively. What ended up killing them wasn't just the physical stuff that they dealt with Mitchell Robinson, but their inability to score and pick and roll because of Jared Allen and Evan Mobley operating in the short roll and out of the dunker spot. They just couldn't score effectively out of there. I want to say Evan Mobley was like 0 for 10 shooting out of the roll last year in that Knicks series, right? So like, offensive skill is a prerequisite to play the 4 now. But if you play the 5, you're going to run into a lot of issues in terms of his overall physical bulk, right? So that's really the turning point for the Cavs, is like, is Evan Mobley going to develop offensively, or is he the next Anthony Davis, the guy that like has offensive moments, but for whatever reason just never develops in terms of his skill set the way that he needs to? And that's up to Evan, for the record. Like, I mean, I even feel like with Anthony Davis, like from what I've heard behind the scenes, like the dude just out of the season just takes like 2 straight months off. And like, that's one of those things where like skill development in particular is literally a lifestyle. Skill development is a 12-month thing. And so like, it is something that like Evan Mobley would have to commit to and really spend the time to make those improvements to be good enough from an offensive standpoint at the 4. If not, if you slide him to the 5, then your 4 has to be super physically imposing. You're going to need somebody of Aaron Gordon's ilk at the 4 to put next to Evan Mobley because of his size limitations, right? That's what makes the LeBron AD front line still functional defensively against most matchups, albeit he's had his issues against those big-bodied centers like we've talked about. But it's LeBron James. He's a really big center. And so when LeBron is really engaged defensively, the two of them make for a really physically imposing 4-5. So like, that's the way I look at it. The crossroads is Evan Mobley's offensive development. If he becomes a gifted offensive player, you keep him at the 4. If he doesn't, you have to put him at the 5, and you have to put some sort of big-bodied 4 next to him. All right, we have 2 questions, and then we're done. Now, Jason, we need you to address Zeke disrespecting Steph Curry on Draymond's pod. Love the show, by the way. Thank you for supporting the show. So there's 2 things that I wanted to hit from the Draymond Green, Isiah Thomas interview. First, the idea that like Kevin Durant saved them when he went in 2017. Here's the thing. Do I think if Kevin Durant did not sign with the Warriors in the summer of 2017, that the Warriors still repeat and go and win back-to-back titles in 2017 and 2018? No, I don't think they repeat. But they were still one of the very best teams in the league. They would have been every bit as likely to win the title as the Cavs in 2017. Like my best guess is that if you play that same setup again without Kevin Durant going to the Warriors, the Cavs split it. They probably get one more, and the Warriors probably get one more in the 2017-2018 stretch. So, like, yeah, Kevin Durant put them over the top to being completely unbeatable, and they won 2 titles, but that doesn't mean that Warriors team wasn't good. That's ridiculous. They won 73 games the year before. It required absolute heroic basketball from Kyrie Irving and LeBron James to barely squeak out a 7-game win in Golden State in 2016. So, like, pretending as though they weren't a championship contender without KD, that's just something I completely disagree with. Like, KD doesn't sign with Golden State, goes somewhere else. The Warriors win one of those 2 titles in 2017 or 2018, in my opinion. That's just how good they were. So, like, I don't really buy into that revisionist history. Like, even when we evaluate Steph, like, no KD, I still think we look at him as a 3-time champion and probably a 2-time finals MVP and should have been a 3-time finals MVP. So, like, I don't really buy into that line of thinking. On the point guard front, this is something that I find incredibly silly because everyone wants to associate point guard with one specific style of play, which is like the guy who brings the ball up the floor and makes all the decisions. But, like, that is really a dying breed these days. You don't really see that very much in the NBA in general. As a matter of fact, the guys who bring the ball up the floor and make all the decisions now are the James Harden 2020, 2021 kind of, or 2018, 2019, I mean, kind of stretch. And then it's like Luka Doncic and like Trae Young. And it's like, that's not even like a positional thing. That's like a heliocentric play style kind of thing. The truth of the matter is like the positions in the NBA more have to do with who you can guard, right? Like, can you guard a guard? Can you guard a 6'5" 2 guard? Can you guard a lanky wing who scores on the perimeter like a Paul George? Can you guard a power wing like an Aaron Gordon or a LeBron James or a Rui Hachimura or whatever in the front court? Can you guard a big-bodied center? Can you guard a skinny, skilled center? Those are the positions. But, like, saying Steph Curry's not a point guard is not fair because there's, like, not that many point guards in the NBA by the traditional mold like what Isiah Thomas was anyway. And by the way, just go back and look at why that position archetype was a thing. Back then, the vast majority of forwards couldn't dribble. And most hubs were centers and forwards. So you needed a ball handling point guard that could bring the ball up against pressure and make a post entry pass. Or if it's a wing scorer, if they run an action to get that wing scorer position somewhere on the floor, you needed the point guard to get the ball to him. Nowadays, the level of ball handling that we get down the roster, including at the forward position, is so insane that you no longer need a point guard to make a post-entry pass. And so as a result of that, like, that point guard position is actually better to have like a guy who can run pick and roll and score, right? Or do more high-level playmaking. But like the high-level playmaking at a pick and roll piece, we literally see every position do that, including centers now. We see Giannis and Nikola Jokic running inverted pick and roll all the time now. So, like, to me, that conversation is completely pointless. The bottom line is, it's Steph's archetype, which is like your primary offensive hub guard, which is more or less what the point guard is now in the modern NBA. He's been the best at it in this era. No one's done it better at the guard position. So, like, the fact that he's off ball more than most players is irrelevant to me. And by the way, if you ran a spread pick and roll 4-out 1-in system and you just spammed ball screens with Steph like Trae Young, he would just be a better version of Trae Young. Steph can do that too. If you let Steph play the way that Trae Young plays, he'd average 35 and 12. But the Warriors wouldn't be as good. Steph embraces 5-out off-ball basketball the way he does because it makes the Warriors a better team. It makes them more versatile. And then what ends up happening is when push comes to shove, what does he do? He runs pick and roll. When the Warriors pushed the Lakers to 6 games last year, they were the lesser team. and a lot of guys who weren't playing as well as they did last year. And so everything fell on Steph. Lakers were playing the best basketball they played since they won in the bubble. And they were playing incredible defensive basketball. And the only reason the Warriors had any chance to win that series was Steph with the ball in his hands, barbecuing them in pick and roll. I rewatched every game in that series over the summer. And it was appalling going back just how helpless the Lakers were dealing with him in pick and roll. That's all point guard, bring the ball up the floor and make decision stuff. He can do that. He chooses to play in this 5-out system off ball because it makes the Warriors more versatile. If they can run that 30 minutes in a playoff game and he only has to spam ball screens for the other 15 minutes, it gives him a better chance of holding up physically. It gives him a better chance of not being repetitive and easy to guard. So, I disagree vehemently with both of those opinions from Isiah Thomas from that interview. Last question. In your opinion, how do you think teams adjusting to playoff pressure will affect their play? And what major teams do you think will be playoff risers or chokers, whether due to game plan or roster assembly? Do you think of any playoff chokers that can overcome their weaknesses in an extended series? So I'm not going to get into specific teams and players in this particular part just because it's a mailbag. We will get into that when we get into our playoff previews in early April. But the main kind of theme behind it is, in my opinion, experience tends to be more resilient in the playoffs. Strength and the ability to hold up under physicality tends to be more resilient in the playoffs. Teams that score a lot in the paint, that's resilient in the playoffs. And then a diversity of shot creation. What that means is if you're a team that relies solely on ball screens to run your offense, you're going to run into issues. Look at the Cavs last year. The only way they could score was through Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell ball screens. And when they had issues scoring out of the roll, their entire offense fell apart. Right. But when you have versatility, right? That's the thing. The Knicks, Jalen Brunson just is an incredible mismatch attacking switch ISO guy. Right. Julius Randle, in theory, when he's healthy, can do that kind of thing. Right. So if you have a versatility in your shot creation, if you have the ability to be hey, this isn't working, let's try this instead. That to me is something that makes a team more resilient when we get in the postseason. We will, when we get to our playoff previews, talk about which teams and players I expect to play better and worse when we get to that point. I just didn't want to hit it in today's mailbag.